Why are more Americans ending up on the streets, even in the richest cities like New York? Every night, tens of thousands of people in New York City sleep in shelters, subway stations, or on cold sidewalks. Families with children, working adults, and elderly citizens all share this invisible crisis. It's not just a housing issue, it's a breakdown across the entire system. Rising rents, stagnant wages, weak mental health support, and waves of new migrants have collided to push the city into a new phase of homelessness. Even with billions of dollars in funding and dozens of public programs, the number of unhoused people keeps rising. In this video, we'll uncover the roots of this growing emergency, examine what New York and the federal government are doing and failing to fix it, and ask the uncomfortable questions behind one of the most visible failures in American society, the crisis of being homeless in America. Why do the poorest among us appear in the wealthiest city? As of April 2025, more than 108,000 people slept in New York City shelters each night, and roughly 70% of them were members of families, including nearly 37 null children. These numbers, shocking yet accurate, demonstrate that even in a city renowned for financial power, the crisis of homeless in America is very much alive. In recent months, city data show approximately 42,700 asylum seekers residing in publicly funded shelters. The influx has strained a system already under pressure. At one point, in late 2023, the Department of Homeless Services recorded nearly 120,000 people receiving shelter and related services every night.
What caused you to be homeless this last time? Or how did you become homeless?
I took a stand in what was right, what was right, and they kicked me out, so be it. So it's
Who kicked you out?
The people I used to live in the backyard. I took over their backyard. I built like a whole homestead in their backyard. Like I had everything, bathroom and kitchen and everything outside, and it just,
Bare statistics, however, fail to capture the human suffering behind each data point. What makes this crisis especially troubling is the convergence of economic, political, and social failures. Since January 2022, the shelter population has nearly doubled, from 45,343 to 89,119 in January 2024. That surge was driven in large part by asylum seekers, who accounted for more than 34,000 of that increase. Even though the city managed a 24% rise in people exiting shelters, the effort was eclipsed by the scale of new arrivals. Many commentators argue that these numbers signal something more profound than a housing issue. How can a city that claims to protect its most vulnerable allow homelessness to become so deeply rooted? The truth is that New York's shelter system is undercut by a severe shortage of affordable housing, insufficient mental health infrastructure, and inconsistent fiscal strategy. These issues are not isolated to New York. They are mirrored in cities across the country, making homelessness in America a national pattern rather than a local exception. On a more human level, this crisis disrupts entire lives. While some temporary shelters, like the Roosevelt Hotel and tent facilities, have closed, thousands remain in limbo. Meanwhile, the city continues to invest billions in emergency contracts with hotels, including a recent $930 million agreement to house up to 86,000 individuals. This approach reflects short-term thinking rather than long-term stability. From my own perspective, this represents a breakdown of leadership and vision. Officials may cite the number of successful shelter exits, but these gains are erased by the ever-growing demand. The root cause, affordable, permanent housing, is consistently delayed. Programs like Housing First are promising, but are often stalled by red tape. Mental health services remain vastly underfunded, particularly for individuals battling addiction or untreated psychiatric conditions. Even worse, these emergency solutions disguise the deeper rot, a lack of structural reform. The term homeless in America has come to symbolize more than lost housing. It reflects the unraveling of basic safety nets. If New York City cannot solve this, what does that say about the future of the rest of the country? This crisis, in all its complexity, sets the stage for understanding the political and economic forces that have pushed the city and the nation into a state of permanent emergency. How can a country with such vast wealth and power allow millions of its citizens to slip through the cracks? In 2025, the United States finds itself navigating a storm of economic uncertainty, political division, and mounting social unrest. These national conditions haven't just created discomfort for the average American, they have pushed the most vulnerable over the edge and directly fueled the worsening crisis of homelessness in major cities like New York. At the heart of the issue is a broken economic foundation. The cost of living has skyrocketed in nearly every major city. In New York alone, the average rent for a one-bedroom apartment has reached over $3,200 a month in 2025, pricing out even middle-income earners. Meanwhile, wages have not kept pace. The federal minimum wage remains at $7.25, unchanged since 2009. And though New York's local wage laws offer some relief, they fall far short of what's needed to live independently in the city. For thousands of people, this gap means one missed paycheck is all it takes to fall into homelessness. National inflation has only made things worse. Although the Biden administration attempted to combat rising prices through targeted subsidies and interest rate adjustments, these measures have been widely criticized as either too slow or misdirected. Groceries, gas, healthcare, and housing all remain out of reach for millions. At the same time, political chaos in Congress has stalled major federal housing legislation, while partisan conflict has blocked efforts to expand mental health and addiction recovery programs nationwide. And then there's immigration. Since early 2023, the U.S. has faced an unprecedented wave of asylum seekers and undocumented migrants crossing the southern border. Cities like New York have declared states of emergency to respond to the overwhelming need for shelter, legal processing, and medical services. Though these individuals come seeking safety and opportunity, the sudden increase in demand has stretched municipal resources to their limit, displacing many longtime residents and contributing to the rising homeless population. many ask, is this a failure of leadership or a result of years of neglect? In truth, it's both. The crisis of homeless in America did not begin in 2025, but this year's compounded economic pressures and weak federal coordination have made it impossible to ignore. As lawmakers argue over budgets, zoning reform, and social safety nets, the people on the street continue to pay the price. In this political and economic storm, the homeless are not just victims of circumstance. They are collateral damage in a system that rewards speculation over stability and rhetoric over results. How long can this continue before the cracks widen into a national rupture? As we continue, we'll explore the solutions being proposed and why many of them fall short. What does it say about a society when its wealthiest cities must rely on emergency hotel contracts to shelter their homeless? In response to the escalating crisis, both New York City and federal agencies have launched a range of programs aimed at managing homelessness. But rather than solving the problem, many of these efforts appear more like temporary patches on a collapsing system. New York City has invested billions in shelter infrastructure. In 2025, it approved nearly $1 billion in contracts with hotels to house homeless individuals and asylum seekers, creating a system where thousands sleep in converted commercial spaces each night. While this may offer temporary relief, it does nothing to address the long-term need for permanent housing. Critics argue that such spending prioritizes crisis containment over sustainable solutions. At the federal level, efforts have included grants through HUD's Continuum of Care program and a renewed push for Housing First, an approach that places individuals in stable housing before addressing mental health or addiction issues. Though Housing First has shown success in smaller pilot programs, scaling it to meet the enormous demand in cities like New York remains slow and underfunded. Federal investment in affordable housing construction has also lagged, largely due to political gridlock and zoning disputes. Local programs like Homebase and the Emergency Rental Assistance Program offer legal support and financial aid to tenants facing eviction. However, demand far exceeds supply, and many are left navigating bureaucracy while living on the streets. Meanwhile, outreach programs struggle to reach those suffering from untreated mental illness or drug dependency, two issues deeply intertwined with the homeless in America. Despite best intentions, these initiatives continue to fall short. Why hasn't more been done to confront the structural roots of this emergency? The next section examines why the numbers keep climbing, even with billions already spent. A decade ago, homelessness in New York City was already a serious concern, but by comparison, the situation today feels almost unrecognizable. In 2015, the average nightly shelter population hovered around 57,000 people. Families made up a significant portion of that figure, but the system, while under stress, still functioned within its limits. Fast forward to 2025, and that number has nearly doubled. Over 108,000 individuals now rely on shelters each night, including thousands of migrants, working adults, and children. The numbers tell a clear story. Despite years of investment and intervention, the crisis has only deepened. One of the most critical factors is the cost of housing. In 2015, the average rent for a one-bedroom apartment in New York was around $2,100. In 2025, it's well above $3,200, and in many neighborhoods, even modest studio apartments can surpass $3,800 per month. These price increases have far outpaced wage growth, effectively locking tens of thousands of New Yorkers out of stable housing. Even middle-class workers are now at risk. When the average worker spends over 50% of their income on rent, a single financial emergency, a medical bill, job loss, or eviction can mean disaster. Ten years ago, the city had more flexibility in how it used housing vouchers and rental assistance programs. But in recent years, the political will to expand such programs has weakened, and bureaucratic delays have increased. For example, the now defunct Advantage program, which once provided rental subsidies for thousands, was eliminated in 2011. Its absence left a vacuum that was never truly filled, contributing to the long-term rise in shelter numbers. Mental health services, too, have declined in accessibility. In the past, inpatient psychiatric facilities and addiction treatment centers played a larger role in stabilizing vulnerable population. Today, these systems are overwhelmed, fragmented, and underfunded. Many of the people living on the streets in 2025 would have been institutionalized or supported more directly a decade ago. The shift away from institutional care, while intended to protect individual rights, has left many with no real alternatives. The social safety net has frayed. 10 years ago, there was still a broad belief that the system, though flawed, was functional. Now, many see it as broken. Can we honestly say that progress has been made? Or has the crisis of homeless in America merely evolved into something larger, more permanent, and harder to reverse? Another driving force behind the current homeless crisis in New York City is the rapid increase in undocumented migration and asylum seekers. Since early 2023, New York has become one of the primary destinations for migrants arriving from the southern border. Many of these individuals arrive without shelter, legal support, or family connections, forcing the city to absorb a growing population with limited infrastructure and few long-term solutions. In 2025 alone, over 42,000 asylum seekers have been placed in city-run shelters, and more than 230,000 migrants have passed through the system since 2022. For a city already struggling to house its existing homeless population, this sudden demand has created a dangerous bottleneck. Shelters once reserved for long-term New Yorkers are now at capacity. Tensions have risen over resource allocation, with some local communities expressing frustration at what they perceive as unequal treatment or political negligence. It is important to clarify, the migrants themselves are not to blame. They are often fleeing violence, climate disasters, or economic collapse. But the federal government's lack of coordinated policy has left cities like New York to deal with the consequences alone. There are few funding channels, minimal guidance, and no national plan to house or integrate these new arrivals. The result is a system on the verge of collapse. Moreover, the politics around migration have paralyzed action. Partisan debates in Washington continue to stall comprehensive immigration reform, while mayors and governors argue over jurisdiction and responsibility. Meanwhile, the crisis of homeless in America intensifies, not just for migrants, but for American citizens who have now been displaced in their own city. How do we create a system that is both humane and sustainable? And who should bear the cost of a crisis that spans far beyond city limits? These questions remain unanswered. At the heart of New York City's homelessness crisis lies a combination of long-standing structural issues that have deepened over time. While emergency responses continue to dominate headlines, the real solutions require addressing the root causes: housing affordability, weakened support systems, behavioral health needs, migration pressures, and slow-moving policy reform. Housing costs remain the single most influential factor. In 2025, the median rent for a one-bedroom apartment in New York City exceeded $3,200 per month, while median household income has not kept pace with inflation. Over 60% of renters now spend more than 30% of their income on housing, with nearly 1/3 spending over half. When rent takes up such a large portion of monthly income, even minor setbacks, such as losing a job, taking unpaid sick leave, or facing an unexpected bill, can lead to eviction or housing instability. The result is predictable: growing numbers of people slipping through the cracks. Compounding this issue is the scarcity of accessible housing support. Rental assistance programs, such as Section 8 vouchers and city-level initiatives, remain underfunded and overwhelmed. Tens of thousands of New Yorkers are on multi-year waiting lists for affordable housing placements. Additionally, past programs like Advantage, which once provided rent subsidies to thousands of families, have been discontinued or scaled back due to shifting political priorities. In a city where every square foot counts, this absence of rental support continues to push families into shelters or shared, overcrowded housing. Behavioral health challenges also play a role, though in a more nuanced way. Many New Yorkers experiencing homelessness live with untreated mental health conditions or use substances to cope with trauma and instability. Rather than viewing this population through a lens of despair, it's essential to recognize their resilience and capacity for recovery. In recent years, harm reduction models and community outreach programs have helped individuals reconnect with support systems, healthcare, and stable environments. However, access remains uneven, and many still fall through the cracks before help reaches them. Meanwhile, the unprecedented wave of asylum seekers has added a new dimension. Over 42,000 migrants are currently housed in shelters, stretching resources that were already thin. These newcomers often arrive with little support, and without a national strategy for housing or integration, the local system is left to shoulder the burden. While compassion is vital, cities need better coordination and funding to serve both longtime residents and recent arrivals effectively. Ultimately, the persistence of homeless in America stems not from a single failure, but from a failure to act comprehensively. Addressing just one part of the equation, housing, health, or policy, will never be enough on its own. The crisis demands bold, multi-layered solutions. The rise of homelessness in New York City is not an isolated failure, but a reflection of deeper national patterns. It exposes the fragility of economic stability, the limits of political will, and the consequences of neglect. Until systemic action is taken, rooted in empathy, planning, and accountability, the crisis of homelessness in America will continue to grow, both in numbers and in silence.